In a vast, empty field, a confused knight called Diaz wonders if he's getting pranked. Over a month ago, he had returned home from a successful victory in war. As a reward, the king of his nation granted him a large domain of his own to live in and manage. Now, Diaz realizes that he got scammed since the king basically kicked him out of the capital to live in a giant patch of empty land. With no further instructions from the king, Diaz thinks he's free, so he wanders around the field searching for food and other resources. After a short while, he comes across a clear stream and enjoys the refreshing water from it. Then, he continues to search the land until it's night. Having found no food or resources, he lies down to rest, thinking that he'll leave the domain if the entire region is empty. The next morning, an Oni girl called Alna interrupts his sleep, kicking him and demanding to know what he's doing in her land. Diaz gets confused. Since there was nobody around him the other day, she doesn't care about his confusion and keeps interrogating him to learn his origins. Diaz tells her that he's literally homeless, so the girl gets skeptical of him. She asks him what he was doing in her land anyway, so he truthfully explains that he was sent by someone to live there. He then tells her that his only current goal is to survive until the next day. As Alna refuses to believe him, Diaz tells her about his dreams. He explains that his late parents asked him to help others and protect the weak as their final wish, which he took as his dream goal. Although Alna expected Diaz to be lying about his noble goal, her horn starts glowing blue, which forces her to believe him. In contrast, Diaz is a pure man, and he doesn't understand why the girl was suspecting him. She asks him if he's a friend or an enemy, but he reminds her that he's neither of those things since they've both just met. For some reason, Diaz's reasonable words just make her even angrier. He wonders why she's so frustrated. Then, he remembers that she's living in her domain, so she's one of his own subjects. Thinking that the girl is testing his sincerity to his subjects, he seriously declares that he is her loyal ally to comfort her. He promises to protect the girl from her enemies, no matter who they are, which causes her horn to shine radiantly. Even the girl is surprised by the intensity of Diaz's sincerity, and she suddenly drags him away somewhere. Soon, they enter a village of honest. Diaz wonders why he couldn't find the village earlier, but he's given no time to react, as the girl drags him to her chief's house. Inside, the chieftain is surprised that Alna brought an outsider, since she's usually very careful around strangers. Alna tells her that her horn never turned red, and instead glowed a brilliant blue, as he declared himself an ally. Hearing this, the chieftain asks Diaz if he will become her ally as well. He accepts, saying that he's the ally of everyone living in the village. However, when Diaz starts to explain that the king sent him, Alna gets up in a rage and points an arrow at him. The chieftain stops her since they haven't heard Diaz's full story, but she also glares at him and demands a full explanation. He stays calm under the threat and explains that his parents always told him to help others and protect the weak. Since they passed away early, Diaz was left an orphan. He gathered the other orphans in town to live together, and they survived by performing small chores and hunting weak monsters. As Diaz grew older, a war broke out with the neighboring nation, so he took his fighting skills to the battlefield. There, he displayed an incredible natural talent for fighting, so he quickly rose through the ranks. After 20 years of a bitter war, Diaz returned victorious, and the king granted him this empty domain as a reward. The chieftain nods, believing that he's sincere about ruling his domain. She then asks him if he'd still be her ally if she and her people were not subjects of his kingdom. Diaz smiles, saying that he'll still protect her as a neighbor. At his words, the chieftain's horn also glows blue, so Alna lowers her bow. Diaz wonders why she asked him such a strange question, and then he realizes something. The chieftain agrees, admitting that she and her people are not his subjects. In fact, her tribe is actually the enemy of his kingdom. Despite their circumstances, the chieftain thinks Diaz can be her ally since his aura is so blue. Before he decides to do anything, she asks him to hear her out. After introducing herself as Mal, she explains that her people were kicked out of the grassland over 50 years ago. Ever since then, they've been at war with his kingdom, trying to win their land back. Diaz wonders how they can live undetected within the kingdom's domain, so she explains that her species can use magic stored within their horns. To demonstrate, she goes invisible with a spell, leaving him stunned. Then, she also reveals that her people can easily conceal their entire village with the same magic. Diaz finally understands why he couldn't detect the village before, but he wonders why Mal is exposing such sensitive information him to him. The chieftain smiles, saying that she wouldn't have trusted him if her horn didn't glow blue. It turns out that the honest can detect the intentions of other species by relying on their horns. If a person has no bad intentions towards them, their horns remain colorless. However, if they have malicious intentions, their horns would turn red to warn them. Sometimes, a person might cause a blue glow, which means they are friendly towards the Oni people. Despite this, if the good-intentioned person begins to have evil intentions, the horn would immediately taint the blue color with red. Since Dayas never caused their horns to show the slightest shade of red, she thinks he's a completely trustworthy person. In fact, she thinks he's a simple-minded fool because he's still trying to honor his dead parents' wishes. Although Dayas is confused, Mal offers to help him rule his domain, promising to give him a house, some food, and some livestock to begin his life. In return, she hopes that he can keep her village secret from the king. Dayas accepts her offer and promises to protect her people as long as they don't threaten his kingdom. Mal is satisfied with his attitude, so she orders Alna to go with him and show him the ways of their village. Alna nods at first, but then she gets shocked after realizing her orders. Mal reminds her that she brought Dayas in the first place, so it's her job to look after him. Though she is frustrated, Alna agrees. Afterward, she goes out with Dayas and gets some villagers to build a house for him. In just a few hours, the villagers efficiently build a house with a wooden structure. Dayas is surprised by their speed, so Alna explains that her people aren't always able to hide. For this reason, they build their houses with lightweight structures so they can be easily removed in case of an emergency. Once the house is set up, Alna tells him that the food and livestock will be sent to him later. She offers to help him with the livestock later, so Dayas thanks her. However, he feels a bit concerned about the number of subjects in his territory and asks her if she's got a way to increase their population. Alna doesn't understand why he even wants more subjects, especially since food is limited in their empty land. She asks him how he'd take care of an increasing population, so Dayas realizes his mistake. She then gives him a bag of strange dust, explaining that it's a special bait that can attract wild animals. Alna tells Dayas to take the dust and spread it away from the village, and she explains that he can earn more money for every beast he gets. The brawny-headed Dayas smiles, happy to get a job that requires muscles instead of brains. A few minutes later, after going out for a good distance, he decides it is finally time to start hunting. However, since Alna never told him how much dust to use, he just spreads the entire bag like an idiot. This attracts an entire herd of wild cattle, but Dayas is only excited by the challenge. He lifts his axe and welcomes the herd, tearing through the beasts as if they're nothing. After hunting half a herd, the rest of the beasts run away, so Dayas is left with the corpses of their beloved relatives. Unfortunately, he finally remembers that he also has to carry the heavy beasts back home. Without a wagon to transport them, he leaves the other beasts behind and carries just a single one. As Dayas walks home, he feels worried that Alna will be upset with him, since she easily gets annoyed by his antics. To his surprise, she is pleased to see the giant beast, since meat is a rare resource in her village. Seeing his disappointed look, Alna wonders what's wrong, so he explains that he had to leave over 3 dozen beasts behind. Hearing how strong he is, she is shocked and instantly rethinks her opinion of him. Mal comes out as well and praises Dayas for his manly display. Alna agrees, and she runs off to alert the villagers so they can carry the rest of the beasts back. Dayas wonders what Mal means by manliness, so she explains that it's simply a man's ability to work. The more a man is able to work and earn, the manlier he is in the eyes of her tribe's women. After learning this, Dayas understands why Alna seems so pleased with him, but he thinks that looks and personality matter as well. Mal disagrees, saying that neither looks nor personality put food on the table. Dayas understands where she's coming from. He realizes that for a small tribe, food and survival are the only important things compared to the people living in the kingdom. Then, Mal tells him that he'll need to work a bit harder if he wants to marry a beauty like Alna. He gets embarrassed and acts like that wasn't his intention, so she starts teasing him even more. The next day, Dayas wakes up from the smell of fresh breakfast in his room. He finds Alna cooking for him, smiling in a completely submissive manner compared to earlier. After having breakfast, he praises her cooking, which causes her to blush. Watching him eat so closely, Alna is unable to bear the tension, so she changes the topic to hunting again. She explains that her tribe still needs a well for water and an outhouse to host guests, which will help Diaz expand his domain. However, the village does not have enough money to pay the craftsmen, so Diaz agrees to hunt for them. Alna asks him to hunt some monsters, so he thinks about it. Although monster meat is toxic and inedible, their rare materials sell for incredible prices. Diaz agrees to hunt, wondering if the peaceful grassland even has any monsters. Alna reveals that she can sense monsters with her magic horn, but Diaz refuses to put her in danger. However, she insists on going with him, so he agrees to take her. Later, as Diaz takes care of his cattle, some village men bring over food and blankets for him. Feeling the respect from them, he realizes that this village truly cares about the men who can protect them. Just then, Alna comes out of his hut after preparing for the journey. Diaz realizes that she's put on some makeup, while the other men get jealous of him. Meanwhile, Alna smiles, saying that the other men will take care of the cattle while they're out hunting. Both of them move out, and after reaching a rocky hill, Alna chants her magic to scout for monsters. A strange blue light surrounds her, which alerts her to the location of a nearby monster. Diaz nods and tells Alna to hide while he hunts the beast, but she refuses. Instead, she offers to help him while using her concealment, so he agrees to let her fight. After a short while, they find the monster, which looks like a giant turtle. Alna's eyes grow wide with shock, since she knows it's actually an earth dragon. However, Diaz doesn't share her fear. Despite her warnings, he jumps out to fight and tells her to remain behind. As the dragon notices him, he jumps on its back and whacks its hard shell. The impact fails to leave a single scratch, and instead breaks the tip of his axe. Diaz tries to attack the dragon's weak points, but it retreats into its shell for defense. Alna suggests running away while he still has the chance, since an earth dragon can wipe out an entire troop of men on its own. Diaz refuses to run since he's still got more tricks up his sleeve. He decides to whack the same spot until it cracks, and begins hammering away at the turtle's back. After a while of banging his axe uselessly, the blade starts cracking. Alna gets worried for him, but Diaz remains confident in his weapon. Since his axe is a special weapon used by a former shogun, it possesses the ability to repair light damage using a mending spell. However, Diaz can only force it to quickly repair itself with magic, so he mends it in front of Alna's shocked eyes. He then continues to pound the dragon's back relentlessly. Eventually, the toxic miasma radiating from the dragon condenses into the area, and Alna starts to feel sick. Realizing she's in danger, he agrees to leave after leaving a final strike. To his surprise, his final hit actually breaks through the dragon's shell. Enraged, the creature gets out of its shell and blows a fireball at him. Diaz dodges the fireball and slashes at the dragon's weak legs. As he prepares to attack, he realizes that the dragon has spotted Alna. Knowing that it's outmatched against Diaz, the clever monster targets her instead. Enraged by its audacity, Diaz jumps into the sky and plunges hard on the dragon, tearing through its spine and killing it. Alna immediately tears up at his display of bravery and rushes into his arms. Before Diaz can process her hug, she immediately declares that they're getting married. Diaz returns to the village shortly afterward, and with the help of several Oni villagers, he drags the earth dragon's massive body through the village. The villagers proudly announce that Diaz was the one who defeated the earth dragon completely on his own, and everyone around them begins cheering and praising him for such an amazing achievement. After the dragon's body is finally placed down safely, Diaz quietly watches all the villagers celebrating. However, he can't help wondering what everyone is so excited about, because he doesn't see defeating the earth dragon as a big deal. Mal then walks over to Diaz and says she still can't believe he managed to defeat the earth dragon all by himself. Diaz simply shrugs it off and says it really wasn't anything special. Rather than asking for treasure or praise, he says he would rather have a proper well and a privy built using the value of the earth dragon. Mal smiles and tells him that won't be a problem at all, because just one of the earth dragon's legs is valuable enough to pay for several wells by itself. Hearing that finally makes Diaz realize just how incredibly valuable the Earth Dragon actually is. Maul then explains that they plan to return many of the dragon's valuable materials back to Diaz since he was the one who defeated it. Besides that, they'll also build the extra facilities he asked for and give him several more gifts as a reward for everything he has done. However, Diaz's expression gets hard when Maul reminds him to save part of the reward for Alna's wedding gift. She says Alna's parents would be delighted to receive something like one of the Earth Dragon's claws or one of its large fangs as a gift. Diaz looks completely confused and honestly has no idea why everyone keeps talking about marriage. He asks Maul what all this marriage talk is supposed to mean. Maul calmly explains that he's going to marry Alna whether he likes the idea or not. She says Alna is willing to do whatever it takes to build a close relationship with him, so making him part of the family through marriage is the best option they have. Maul also tells Diaz that even if he somehow doesn't end up marrying Alna, he won't be able to avoid the problem because all the other girls in the village will immediately start surrounding him and trying to win him over instead. After hearing that, Diaz quickly realizes that would probably become an even bigger problem than marrying Alna in the first place. Even so, Maul tells him not to worry because Alna has already gone to speak with her parents about arranging the marriage. As soon as Diaz hears that, he realizes that's probably the reason he hasn't seen Alna anywhere for a while. He then asks Maul if that means the two of them are officially engaged now. Maul explains that Oni don't follow the same engagement customs that humans do. Instead, once both sides agree, they simply get married right away. Even so, Diaz will still be the one who decides exactly when the marriage actually takes place. Maul goes on to explain that the stronger the bonds Diaz builds with the village and its people, the closer he'll come to becoming the next superb lord. She's putting so much effort into helping Diaz become the superb lord because she knows exactly what happened the last time. The previous person chosen for the position turned out to be completely unfit to lead everyone, and she doesn't want history to repeat itself by allowing another unsuitable person to become the next lord. After Maul leaves, Diaz overhears some of the villagers talking about how lucky Alna is to be marrying someone as strong as him at such a young age. Hearing that makes Diaz curious, so he asks one of them how old Alna actually is. The moment he learns that she's only 15 years old, his jaw practically drops since he's 35. He's old enough to be her father, making the whole situation even more shocking to him. Thankfully, the kingdom has a law that says people must be at least 18 years old before they can get married. That means Diaz would only be engaged to Alna for the next 3 years, and by the time the wedding finally happens, he'll likely have become a full-fledged lord. Sitting by himself, Diaz realizes he needs some time to sort out his thoughts and prepare himself for everything that's happening around him. Not long after, Alna walks over to him with a bright smile and tells him that everything has already been arranged. She then asks what he would like to have for breakfast the next morning. Diaz simply smiles back and tells her he's fine with anything she decides to make. However, he never expected that he would end up attending a huge Oni introduction banquet, where everyone officially welcomed him into the village and celebrated his future with Alna. Sometime after the banquet, the new well and privy were finally completed, and life in the village gradually settled back into its normal routine. That afternoon, Diaz finishes building another tent and thinks to himself that he needs to get much better at making them. After all, if more people decide to move into the village, he doesn't want any of the new residents sleeping on the bare ground without proper shelter. Just then, Alna suddenly walks over to him and says she's sensing a monster coming from the north. She explains that it doesn't seem to be a very large monster, but it's definitely moving straight toward the village. Diaz calmly says he'll go and deal with it himself, believing it won't take long. However, Alna insists that she wants to come with him. Diaz argues that it's too dangerous for her, but after Alna keeps insisting and refuses to stay behind, he finally gives in and allows her to come along. Before long, the two of them arrive at the source of the disturbance and discover that the monster heading toward the village is actually an ogre. Seeing how large the ogre is, Diaz and Alna realize they need to end the fight as quickly as possible. The two of them immediately charge into battle, and Diaz is surprised by how light Alna is on her feet and how skilled she is with a bow. She moves around the battlefield with ease while landing accurate shots, and by working together, the two of them manage to bring the ogre down without too much trouble. However, the ogre's blood smells absolutely awful. After the battle, Alna wrinkles her nose and tells Diaz to go wash himself properly because she's not letting him into the house while he smells like that. Diaz has no choice but to clean himself up before heading back. The following day, Diaz is lost in thought as he remembers how disappointing yesterday turned out to be. Instead of meeting new people who might become citizens of the village, they only ended up fighting another dangerous monster. Just then, Alna suddenly comes running toward him and excitedly announces that they're pregnant and are going to have little ones, though it turns out she was actually talking about Francois, who had finally become pregnant after waiting for a very long time. Alna then reminds Diaz that bars are incredibly intelligent creatures, but that intelligence comes with a weakness. They're much more sensitive to fear and emotional stress than most races, and that problem becomes even worse during pregnancy. Sometimes the pressure becomes so overwhelming that it can even cost them their lives. Because of that, Alna suggests that Diaz stay close to Francois and Francis for a while so they can feel safe and supported. For the time being, they'll all be staying together in the same yurt. Alna assumes Diaz probably won't like the arrangement because bars become especially smelly during pregnancy. To her surprise, Diaz honestly doesn't mind at all and agrees without complaining. Seeing his reaction makes Alna feel relieved because it shows just how thoughtful and considerate he really is. A moment later, Alna's horn suddenly begins to glow, which is a sign that monsters, or at least unfamiliar visitors, are nearby. She quickly explains that she can sense 10 horses approaching from the east. Diaz realizes that's the same direction as the royal capital, but he isn't expecting any visitors, making the situation seem suspicious. Diaz decides to go and investigate while Alna stays behind to watch over the village. He quickly runs across the open fields and soon spots the group of travelers. At first, he prepares himself in case they're enemies, but his attitude changes the moment he recognizes his old friend Klaus among them. He immediately greets him with a friendly handshake and asks what he's doing all the way out here. Klaus explains that the lady traveling with them is the one who came to see Diaz. Diaz has no idea who she's supposed to be, but he decides to bring the group back to his tent so they can talk in private. While there, he realizes it was a smart decision to hide everything except the yurt he built. He promised to keep the Oni village a secret, and explaining their existence to outsiders would have created a lot of unnecessary problems. Once everyone is settled, the young woman finally introduces herself as Diane, the third princess of the kingdom. She politely asks Diaz if his manor is still under construction because she hasn't seen any servants or signs of a noble's estate nearby. Diaz simply explains that he doesn't own a manor and has no servants working for him. The only home he has is the yurt standing in front of them, and even if it doesn't look very impressive, he spent a great deal of time building it with his own hands. Diane is surprised to hear that Diaz built everything around him with his own hands, especially because the king had supposedly given him a huge reward along with an even larger amount of money to help him get started. To her surprise, Diaz explains that he never received a single coin from the king. Instead, he was simply dropped off in the middle of nowhere without even being given food or water to survive. Putting that aside, Diaz asks Diane what brought her all the way out to such a remote place. Diane explains that a war is about to break out around the royal capital, and they've come to ask for his help because people now see him as the kingdom's heroic savior. As payment for his help, she even offers to marry him herself as a reward. However, Diaz has absolutely no interest in getting involved in another war. With Francois having just become pregnant, he has more important things to protect, so he calmly turns down her offer and politely asks Diane to leave if that's the only reason she came. One of Diane's guards becomes furious after hearing Diaz reject the princess's proposal and tries to intimidate him by swinging his sword. Before the attack can even reach him, Diaz reacts on pure instinct and knocks the weapon aside with a single strike, splitting the sword cleanly in half. The guard immediately prepares to attack again, but Klaus quickly steps in and stops him. He tells the others there's no point trying to fight Diaz because even if every one of them attacked together, they still wouldn't stand a chance against him. After the group leaves, Diaz looks around and realizes he may have used a little too much force. His attack damaged the floor matting inside the yurt, and he immediately realizes Alna is definitely going to scold him for making such a mess. Meanwhile, Diane quietly leaves while holding a grudge against Diaz for refusing both her request and her marriage offer. As Diaz steps outside, Alna suddenly reveals herself along with Francis and Francois, who had been hiding nearby the entire time. Alna explains that everyone who came with Diane left with a red aura except for one person, whose aura remained blue. She explains that a red aura represents hostility, while a blue aura shows trust or affection. After hearing that, Diaz figures the only person with the blue aura must have been Klaus. The following morning, Diaz wakes up to the smell of breakfast as Alna prepares the morning meal. While cooking, she suddenly tells him that there's a human wandering around nearby. What's strange is that the person doesn't seem to be searching for anything in particular and is simply walking around without any clear direction. Diaz assumes it's probably just a traveler who got lost, so he decides to go and check for himself. Alna, Francis, and Francois decide to follow him as well, but they use their concealment ability so they won't be seen by the visitor. After walking through the valley for a while, Diaz finally spots the traveler and realizes it's Klaus. When they meet, Diaz immediately notices that Klaus is no longer wearing his armor or carrying his sword. Klaus explains that he had himself dismissed from the army because he didn't want to end up fighting on the front lines of the coming war. Instead, he traveled all the way here because he wants to work for Diaz as his personal soldier. Hearing that, Diaz remembers that Klaus was the only person who never looked down on him for being an orphan, even when everyone else treated him differently. Klaus always treated him with respect. Diaz admits that having someone like Klaus by his side would be reassuring, but before making a decision, he feels he should ask Alna what she thinks. The next moment, Alna suddenly appears out of nowhere, completely catching Klaus by surprise. She tells Diaz there's nothing to worry about because Klaus has kept a blue aura the entire time, proving that he has no hostile intentions. Klaus immediately starts bombarding Diaz with questions about where Alna suddenly came from and how she appeared out of thin air. Diaz simply tells him it's a really long story before saying he'll explain everything once they get back home. It's now been 10 days since Klaus decided to leave his old life behind and start a new one with Diaz. During that time, Diaz kindly helped Klaus build a yurt of his own so he would have a proper place to live. He also gave Klaus a spear and a full set of armor made from the materials of the earth dragon Diaz defeated. Klaus knows these are incredibly valuable gifts that even members of the royal family would struggle to obtain. Because of everything Diaz has done for him, Klaus promises himself that he'll never betray the trust Diaz has placed in him. Later that day, Alna prepares lunch and serves everyone a warm meal. As Klaus eats, he's genuinely impressed by how delicious the food is. He praises Alna's cooking and tells her that she would make an excellent wife for Diaz. Hearing such a sincere compliment makes Alna smile, and she happily tells Klaus that he's welcome to have another serving if he'd like. While they continue eating, Klaus addresses Diaz as Lord and politely asks him to join the meal. Diaz immediately tells Klaus that he doesn't have to be so formal all the time and asks him to simply call him by his name instead. However, Klaus refuses, saying that it's important to make the difference in their positions clear. Seeing how serious Klaus is about it makes Diaz realize that Klaus is much more dedicated and enthusiastic than he first thought. Just then, Alna's horn suddenly begins glowing green. She immediately announces that she can sense 12 humans approaching from the east. As she continues focusing on their presence, Diaz learns that one of the 12 people is extremely weak and is already on the verge of death. Hearing that, he decides to head out into the fields and investigate the situation himself. Klaus quickly says he wants to come along and help, but Diaz tells him to stay behind and protect the village instead. He explains that someone needs to remain behind in case something unexpected happens. Diaz adds that if they run into any serious danger, he'll send Alna and Francis back immediately to warn him. With that decided, Diaz, Alna, and Francis leave the village and head toward the approaching group. After watching them disappear into the distance, Klaus begins thinking about who these visitors could be. He suspects they're probably people sent from the royal capital. Right now, the kingdom is caught in the middle of a fierce succession dispute between the 5 princes and princesses, with each of them fighting to become the next ruler. Klaus remembers that Princess Diane has far less military strength than any of her siblings. That's probably why she came all the way out here earlier in hopes of recruiting Diaz to fight on her side. Klaus also starts to suspect that the reason Diaz never received the reward the king promised him is because the second prince secretly took it for himself. Klaus knows that the conflict between the nobles won't stay in the capital forever. Eventually, that political political struggle will spread to this village as well. Even so, he doesn't fear what's coming. Instead, he quietly decides that if the day ever comes, he won't hesitate to fight and even give his life for Diaz if that's what it takes. Only a few moments later, Klaus is surprised to see Diaz returning much sooner than expected, along with a group of exhausted and worn-out refugees. Diaz and Alna immediately begin taking care of the travelers, making sure everyone has somewhere to rest while giving food and water to those who need it most. By the time night falls, Diaz finally explains the situation to Klaus. He reveals that every one of those people had been driven out of the land they once called home, leaving them with nowhere else to go. The elderly women in the domain were kicked due to the massive food shortage. The people believed feeding old people was a waste, so they abandoned them. When Klaus hears this, he quickly realizes the neighboring domain must be the Castex. He actually passed through that place on his way here, and it was in terrible condition. The old woman lying on the ground is Granny Maya, who is also their leader. Diaz explains that she used her fortune-telling ability to find a way for them to survive, which is how they ended up here. But instead of seeing this as a problem, Diaz is happy because they have just gained 12 new subjects for his domain. Diaz immediately starts building yurts for the new arrivals, but Klaus stops him. He reminds Diaz that these elderly people won't be able to do much work or help the domain grow. Diaz simply smiles and says that makes them even more valuable because they can teach everyone the secrets to living a long life. Alna agrees with Diaz and says they should warmly welcome their new people. At that moment, Klaus finally understands that this way of thinking is the reason Diaz has managed to come this far. Klaus remembers his time as a knight during the war. When things became hopeless, every other soldier decided to run away and save themselves. Diaz was the only one who stayed behind. Instead of thinking about himself, he rescued a crying child and safely brought the child back to his mother. As enemy soldiers closed in on them, Klaus and Diaz fought side by side and defeated the entire squad by themselves. Klaus ended up covered in injuries after the battle, but Diaz didn't even have a single scratch. Even after winning, Diaz was more concerned about calming down a crying baby than celebrating the victory. Remembering that day makes Klaus realize what a fool he had been. Back then, he believed the greatest honor was dying for Diaz, but now he understands that his real purpose is to stay alive and continue supporting him for as long as he can. By the next day, Diaz finishes building all the yurts, so everyone gathers inside one of them for a meeting. Grandma Maya tells Diaz that the elderly people will still be useful. When the bar wool starts piling up, they can spin the yarn and turn it into cloth. Diaz thinks that would be a huge help for the village. However, everyone notices that Diaz doesn't look very happy, so they ask him what's bothering him. Diaz explains that now that he finally has enough people, he wants to officially give their settlement a name, but he can't come up with one that he likes. The others quickly suggest calling it Diaz Village, but he refuses because he doesn't want the village to be named after himself. Klaus then suggests Dragon Slayer Village, but everyone rejects that idea too. Then Alna speaks up with another idea. She suggests calling it Iluk Village, which means the first village in the ancient language. Diaz immediately likes how it sounds, and everyone agrees that it is the perfect name. Just like that, their new home officially becomes Iluk Village. After the meeting ends, Grandma Maya quietly walks over to Diaz. She can tell he wants to bring more people into the village, so she gives him an idea. She suggests selling the dragon materials he has collected and using the money to buy some slaves. Diaz immediately rejects that idea because he hates slavery. During the war, he saw countless enslaved soldiers on the battlefield, and every one of them was treated terribly. Because of those experiences, he has already decided that the buying and selling of slaves will be completely banned in his domain. After hearing his answer, Grandma Maya admits that she only brought up the idea as a test to see how he would respond. She apologizes for testing him, but explains that it's because they have suffered under many cruel people in the past. Diaz knows she is talking about the Castex. He promises her that Iluk Village will never become a place like that, and that everyone living there will be treated with respect. The next day, a traveling merchant arrives at Diaz's domain. Diaz is completely surprised when he realizes the merchant is actually a frog. The merchant climbs down from his horse and introduces himself as Pagan. He explains that he came to inspect the dragon materials they want to sell. Diaz looks over at Alna's horn and notices that it has turned white, showing that Pagan has no hostile intentions toward them. Feeling at ease, Diaz places places the dragon materials in front of him. Pagan is stunned by how enormous they are. Looking at them more closely, he starts wondering if Diaz is really telling the truth about defeating such a huge dragon all by himself. Instead of arguing or trying to convince him with words, Diaz decides to prove it through action. He uses his signature attack and slices one of the dragon scales cleanly in half with a single strike. Seeing that incredible display of strength is all the proof Pagan needs, he immediately accepts that Diaz truly was the one who defeated the dragon. After that, Pagan brings out two young girls and says he hopes Diaz will take them for a fair price. Diaz immediately looks at the girls and assumes they are being sold as slaves, which makes him furious. Just as he is about to react, Alna grabs his hand and tells him to calm down. Granny Maya then steps forward and politely tells Pagan that they have no interest in buying slaves. Pagan quickly explains the situation. He says the two girls are not slaves at all. They are twin sisters, and the village where they were born believed that twins only brought disaster and bad luck. Because of that belief, the villagers planned to execute them. Their parents escaped with the girls and hid deep inside the forest. As time passed, both of their parents became seriously ill and realized they did not have much time left. Before they died, they met Pagan and begged him to take care of the twins. At first, Pagan refused because he was a merchant, not someone who did charity work. However, the parents offered him a large amount of money, and he eventually accepted. Now that all of that money has been spent, continuing to care for the girls has only pushed him deeper into debt. With no other choice, he asks Diaz to take the twins in. Alna tells Diaz that Pagan is speaking honestly, so Diaz agrees to take custody of the girls. He even offers to repay Pagan for everything he spent while taking care of them. Pagan is deeply grateful for Diaz's kindness. Diaz then gently picks up the two girls and welcomes them to the village. He asks for their names, and they shyly introduce themselves as Senai and Ihan. Diaz smiles and tells them they both have beautiful names. He then asks them to go and take a bath with Alna so they can get cleaned up before dinner. After the girls leave, Klaus admits that he is surprised by how naturally Diaz gets along with children. Diaz explains that when he was younger, he acted like an older brother and father figure to the other orphans, so taking care of children comes naturally to him. By sunset, Senai and Ihan return after their bath, and Diaz notices how clean and refreshed they look. At the same time, Granny Maya realizes that the twins are not completely human. Even so, she feels they will fit in perfectly with everyone living in Iluk village. A little later, Alna walks over to the twins and explains that their names have a strong connection to the moon in the ancient language. Because of that, she gives each of them an Ahai jewel, saying that the power of the moon is believed to rest inside those stones. Hearing those words reminds Senai and Ihan of their parents. The memory is enough to make both of them burst into tears. Diaz and Alna immediately hug the girls and comfort them, telling them they no longer have to worry because they are finally safe. As the twins spend time getting to know the bars, Alna quietly tells Diaz that Senai and Ihan do not appear to be fully human. Diaz listens carefully but does not seem bothered by it. Around 10 days later, the twins have become much more comfortable living in the village. They can even be seen arguing with each other over a half-eaten potato. Suddenly, Alna senses that a single person is riding toward the village on horseback. Diaz says he will go and see who it is. Before he leaves, Senai and Ihan ask him to come back home safely. Out in the open field, Diaz spots the rider approaching. Alna senses a white presence coming from him, meaning he has no hostile intentions. After reaching them, the man introduces himself as Camelots from the Castex domain. He explains that the ruler of the Castex, Lord Eldon, wishes to meet with Diaz. Camelot says Lord Eldon is already on his way and asks if it would be alright for the meeting to take place inside Diaz's manor. Before he can finish speaking, Diaz cuts him off and says they will meet right here instead. Camelot understands his decision and rides away to deliver the message. As Diaz waits, he thinks about the situation. A newly appointed lord coming here can only mean that the second prince's rebellion was successful. Even so, Diaz has already made up his mind. No matter what happens, he will not allow Lord Eldon anywhere near Iluk village. A short while later, Diaz looks into the distance and is shocked when he finally sees Lord Eldon approaching. Diaz knows that the lord of the Castek domain is rumored to have many female slaves around him. Because of this, Diaz immediately decides that he doesn't want someone like that anywhere near his people. However, Diaz Diaz is left completely shocked when Alna informs him that the Lord and all of his people have a blue, friendly aura. This makes Diaz realize that his first impression of Eldon may have been completely wrong. The Lord then excitedly runs over to Diaz and introduces himself as Eldon. Eldon explains that ever since he was a child, he has heard stories about Diaz's incredible achievements as the heroic savior. Because of those stories, Eldon has always looked up to Diaz and greatly respected him. Diaz quickly realizes that he had gotten the wrong idea about Eldon. He apologizes for his earlier thoughts and welcomes Eldon and his people to the village. Putting that aside, Eldon suddenly asks Diaz who the young woman standing beside him is. Both Diaz and Alna are immediately shocked by the question. After all, Alna is currently using her camouflage ability, which should make her completely invisible. Eldon explains that he can't actually see Alna, but his ears and nose are extremely sharp. Even though she is invisible, he is still able to sense her presence. Realizing that there is no point in hiding anymore, Alna decides to reveal herself. She deactivates her camouflage and introduces herself to Eldon as Diaz's wife. Eldon immediately notices the horn on Alna's head and assumes that she is a demi-human. However, Alna quickly corrects him and explains that she isn't a demi-human at all. She is actually an Anakin. Alna admits that she has never heard the term demi-human before, so Eldon explains what it means. He says that demi-human is a general term used to describe people who aren't human but are still similar to humans in some ways. After hearing this explanation, Alna realizes that she is technically a demi-human after all. She admits this to Eldon, and the moment he hears it, he becomes extremely happy. Tears of joy even begin to fill his eyes as he excitedly asks Diaz if he and Alna already have any children together. Diaz admits that they don't have any children yet. However, Alna quickly adds that she plans to have at least 10 children with Diaz in the future. Alna then mentions that Diaz is currently raising 2 demi-human orphans. Hearing this makes Eldon incredibly excited. He becomes so overwhelmed with happiness that he suddenly transforms into an elephant and uses his trunk to pick Diaz up. Diaz is completely shocked by this and finally realizes that Eldon is actually a demi-human as well. However, the transformation seems to have taken a serious toll on Eldon's body. Diaz and the others quickly take Eldon back to his carriage so he can rest. There, Camelot explains that Eldon is actually half demi-human and has the ability to switch between his human and animal forms. However, changing between his 2 forms puts a lot of stress on his body. Because of this, Eldon depends heavily on the care and support of his devoted wives, who help look after him. Eldon then speaks up and explains that he simply became too excited earlier and transformed without thinking about the strain it would put on his body. Unfortunately, his body couldn't keep up with his excitement, which is why he became so exhausted afterward. Diaz understands Eldon's situation, but he soon shifts the conversation toward the rebellion that is currently taking place. Eldon doesn't deny that he is involved in the rebellion. However, he explains that his actions are not meant to cause trouble for no reason. According to Eldon, he is only fighting because he wants to protect the people who are closest to him. Camelot explains that the whole situation began when Eldon was still a child. The previous lord of the Kasdek domain, Lord Inkars, had a wife and 2 sons. However, Inkars treated his first son poorly because the boy looked too much like him. Instead, Inkars was much prouder of his other son, who was handsome, bright, and born to an elephant kin. Inkars eventually declared this second son to be his true heir and gave him an important position and authority within the domain. That son was Eldon. Eldon explains that until he was 4 years old, he believed that he was a completely normal human. However, one day, he discovered the truth about himself and learned that he was actually a demi-human. He also discovered something even more shocking. His true mother was being kept as a slave. From that moment on, Eldon began spending more time with his mother and slowly developed a close relationship with her. At the same time, he secretly worked behind the scenes to protect other demi-humans living in the domain. Eldon had to keep all of this hidden from his father, Inkars, because he knew that if his father ever discovered what he was doing, the demi-humans would likely be placed in chains and treated even worse. Eldon then tells Diaz that his greatest wish is to live in a world where everyone can live together in peace, regardless of where they come from or whether they are human or demi-human. After hearing his story, Alna remembers something she heard about Eldon and asks him about the rumor that the Lord's second son has a large group of female slaves around him. Camelot explains that the rumor was actually created intentionally as part of their plan. The truth is completely different. Eldon and his wives genuinely love each other, and their relationship is based on real affection rather than slavery. Alna finds this incredibly sweet and thinks their relationship is actually very cute. However, Camelot explains that keeping up this deception was not easy. Eventually, Lord and Cars became suspicious and nearly started a full-scale war against everyone in his domain. Fortunately, Eldon was prepared for such a situation. He managed to gather his own forces and stood against his father's army. In the end, Eldon and his allies successfully defeated the entire army of Lord and Cars. After explaining everything, Eldon turns his attention back to Diaz. He tells Diaz how much he respects him and explains that he has heard countless stories about his achievements as the heroic savior. Eldon has admired Diaz for a long time and hopes that the two of them can remain on good terms. More importantly, Eldon hopes that they can work toward creating a world where humans and demi-humans can live together peacefully. Diaz tells Eldon that he already supports those ideals. After all, everyone in Iluk village already lives together peacefully, regardless of whether they are human or non-human. Diaz admits that it would be wonderful if the rest of the world could become like Iluk village, where everyone is able to live together without hatred or discrimination. Hearing this, Eldon's eyes begin to fill with tears. He realizes that the dream he has spent so much of his life fighting for is already being put into practice right in front of him. For the first time, Eldon sees proof that a world where humans and demi-humans can peacefully coexist may actually be possible. After that, Diaz and Eldon spend some time talking and thinking of ways to encourage more people to move into their domains. Diaz considers spreading the word through merchants who travel between different areas, while Eldon says that he plans to make an official announcement in Kazdek to let people know about the opportunities available in his domain. Before leaving, Eldon also gives Diaz some advice. He suggests that Diaz start building up a much larger food supply because he will need plenty of food if he plans to expand his domain and welcome more people. Diaz thanks Eldon for the advice and promises to keep it in mind. By sunset, Eldon finally gets into his carriage and begins his journey back to Kazdek. Diaz then returns home, but the moment he arrives, Senai and Ihan immediately start scolding him for not coming back when he promised. The two children are so angry that their voices are practically loud enough to blow Diaz's face off. Their tantrum eventually becomes so exhausting that both of them completely run out of energy and fall asleep. Diaz and Alna then stay nearby and watch over them. Alna thinks Diaz should have scolded the children because they were punching and kicking him while complaining about how late he was. They even insisted on staying awake because Diaz had broken his promise to come home on time. Diaz admits that their behavior isn't exactly good, but he also knows that he was the one who broke his promise first. Because of that, he decides to let the children off this time. Putting that aside, Diaz tells Alna about his conversation with Eldon and explains that he plans to start a crop farm to increase their food production. Alna is just about to give Diaz her opinion on the idea when something suddenly changes. Her horn begins glowing, and she immediately senses that there are 5 intruders nearby. Diaz and Alna realize that the 5 people are coming from a completely different direction than Eldon's group. Because of this, they assume that the newcomers must be bandits. Diaz tells Alna to stay behind while he investigates, but Alna quickly reminds him that it is far too dark for him to see properly on his own. She explains that he will need her help to find the intruders. Diaz realizes that she has a point, so the two of them head out together to find out who has entered their territory. Meanwhile, several hooded men carrying torches are seen standing in the middle of a field. They have traveled all this way with one goal in mind. They want to take down Diaz at all costs. The bandits know that they would have no chance against him in broad daylight, so they decided to sneak into his territory at night and catch him by surprise. At first, the group feels confident that their plan will work. However, their confidence quickly disappears when arrows suddenly begin flying toward them from the darkness. The arrows are coming from the direction of a strange red light in the distance. The bandit leader immediately orders the others to keep firing at the enemy. The group continues shooting arrows toward the red light, hoping to hit whoever is hiding there. After firing for a while, they finally manage to hit someone. The bandits believe they have figured out the enemy's location, so they immediately charge toward the area to finish the attack. But they have made a huge mistake. Before they can even react, Diaz suddenly appears out of nowhere and takes down 4 of the bandits bandits at once. The bandit leader is completely shocked by what he sees. He is then distracted by the glowing light coming from Alna's horn. But before he can figure out what is happening, Diaz suddenly appears directly in front of him. Diaz delivers a powerful kick that sends the bandit leader flying and knocks him unconscious. Meanwhile, the person who hired the bandits manages to escape from the battlefield. As he runs away, he begins regretting ever getting involved with Diaz in the first place. However, one of his old injuries suddenly starts acting up again, causing him to collapse on the ground. As he lies there in pain, the man begins blaming Diaz for everything that has happened to him. He remembers that back when they first met, Diaz was nothing more than an ordinary commoner. The nobleman can't believe that someone like Diaz had the nerve to attack him despite his noble status. Because of this humiliation, the man swears that he will get revenge on Diaz someday, no matter what it takes. Back at the battlefield, Diaz and Alna manage to round up all the remaining bandits. Diaz looks at them and can't believe they were foolish enough to come into his territory and try their luck as bandits. As the lord of the land, Diaz prepares to announce their punishment. Alna expects something serious, perhaps even a brutal punishment like beheading. However, Diaz surprises her. Instead of killing them, he simply gives them a warning and kicks them out of his territory. Diaz explains that nobody was seriously hurt during the incident, so he is willing to let them go this time. However, he warns them that if they ever return to his domain to cause trouble again, he won't be nearly as forgiving. Alna understands his decision, and the two of them begin walking back home together. As they walk, Alna starts thinking about the first time she ever met Diaz. She remembers how shocked she was when she first saw a grown man lying carelessly in the middle of a field. At the time, she assumed Diaz was a bandit and briefly considered killing him. However, for some reason, she decided to speak to him instead. Looking back on everything that has happened since then, Alna realizes that choosing not to kill Diaz was probably the best decision she has ever made. Thinking about how much her life has changed because of that one decision makes Alna become emotional. Suddenly, she decides to do something unexpected. Alna activates her camouflage and turns completely invisible. Alna quietly sneaks up behind him and gives him a quick kiss on the cheek. But just 10 seconds later, Alna becomes incredibly embarrassed by what she has done. She immediately turns around and runs away. Diaz is left confused for a moment before realizing what just happened. He then starts chasing after her as Alna runs away, completely embarrassed by her sudden burst of affection. That was episode 4. Subscribe to not miss the next part and watch the next video on screen. I heard that you addicted to them sands now, girl. Go ahead with your slippy ass. Go ahead, go ahead. Shawty, give me a reason. You know that I'm leaving.